Naples, Italy, spring, 1944. The carefully applied rouge on her cheeks couldn't disguise Maria Conti's exhaustion as she prepared for another evening at the Case Chiuse No. 7. This regulated brothel, a stone building with faded yellow walls on Via San Bartolomeo, had been her home since January. The mirror reflected a woman of 24 who looked a decade older, her eyes betraying resignation as she adjusted her only good dress. Downstairs, she could hear the arrival of American GIs, their boisterous English echoing through the thin walls. The madam had instructed all 12 women to expect the same treatment they'd received from the German soldiers before Naples' liberation in October 1943. "They're men at war," she had warned. "Prepare for roughness." Maria touched her bare finger where a wedding ring might have been. A habit from watching respectable women in the streets. She had sold her mother's thin gold band for bread during the winter famine, when daily rations fell to 100 grams of bread and civilians survived on just 700 calories. Across Allied-occupied southern Italy that spring, an estimated 30,000 Italian women worked in regulated brothels. Military documents from Allied Force headquarters show that by April 1944, 42 official Case Chiuse operated in Naples alone, serving approximately 14,000 troops monthly. Economic desperation drove women like Maria to these houses. Inflation had reached 520% since 1940, while unemployment among women in liberated southern Italy exceeded 74%. A kilogram of bread on the black market cost 300 lire when monthly wages, for those lucky enough to find work, averaged 1,500 lire. The American military approach to prostitution followed pragmatic public health concerns rather than moral considerations. Venereal disease had infected 606 soldiers per 1,000 in Naples during the first month of occupation. By March 1944, mandatory prophylactic stations, health inspections, and regulated houses reduced this rate to 76 per 1,000. Maria expected humiliation from these foreigners. German soldiers had treated Italian women as spoils of war. The madam reminded her daily that this was her fate now, to service conquering armies marked forever by the shameful yellow card issued by health authorities that identified her as a prostitute. When the door opened, Maria braced herself. The American who entered wasn't what she expected. Staff Sergeant Michael Kovac from Pennsylvania stood awkwardly, cap in hand, looking more nervous than she felt. He was 23, though the liberation of Naples and the brutal fighting at Monte Cassino had aged him too. In his pocket was a month's combat pay, 3,000 lire, enough for multiple visits or other luxuries. Unlike German officers who had demanded subservience, he attempted conversation despite the language barrier. "Mi chiamo Michael," he said in broken Italian, pointing to himself, then noticing her bare hands. What Maria couldn't know as she stood in that small room with peeling wallpaper and a narrow iron bed was that this encounter would mark the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through the Case Chiuse of occupied Italy. The Allied invasion, which had brought 189,000 American troops to southern Italy by early 1944, was about to create an unexpected reversal of the women's anticipated shame. Across Italy's occupied territories, from Sicily to Rome, thousands of women who expected exploitation would encounter something else entirely. What began as routine military management of prostitution would evolve into an unplanned social experiment, challenging both American and Italian preconceptions. The mathematics of respect were being written in unexpected gestures and small kindnesses, revealing an American cultural approach that rendered Italian expectations not inevitable fate, but unnecessary suffering. A generation of women prepared for degradation would instead experience a curious dignity, beginning with the simple question of why Maria wore no wedding ring. Rome, 1943. The collapse of Mussolini's government in July sent shockwaves through Italian society. Carmela Esposito, a 22-year-old daughter of a shopkeeper, watched as German troops occupied her city following Italy's armistice with the Allies. Her father's grocery store had been emptied, first by rationing that limited pasta to 2 kilograms monthly per family, then by German requisitions that left shelves bare. By December, her family faced starvation. The winter of 1943–44 would be remembered as l'inverno della fame, the winter of hunger, when average daily caloric intake in occupied territories fell to 850 calories, less than half pre-war levels. Economic devastation transformed women like Carmela into reluctant prostitutes. Government records show female unemployment reached 81% in central Italy as factories closed or converted to German military production. When her father died during an Allied bombing raid in November, Carmela joined an estimated 75,000 Italian women who entered prostitution between 1943 and 1945. The fascist-era Merlin law still regulated prostitution through the Case Chiuse system, requiring weekly health examinations and registration with police authorities. The medical examinations remained a ritual of humiliation. Every Tuesday at 7 a.m., women lined up at designated clinics where harried doctors examined up to 40 women hourly. The cramped waiting rooms smelled of disinfectant and fear. Those found infected were immediately hospitalized in locked wards. Those cleared received a stamp in their yellow health cards, documents they were legally required to present to clients. These cards, with their official photographs and health stamps, became symbols of their fallen status. Inside the Case Chiuse, women shared cramped quarters, typically 4 to 5 to a room when not working. The Salaria district of Rome housed 23 regulated brothels by early 1944, each containing between 8 and 15 women. Military records indicate that houses serving officers maintained higher standards. Individual rooms with iron-framed beds, wash basins, and sometimes even hot water. Houses for enlisted men offered only basic facilities, with thin mattresses and shared bathrooms where the scent of cheap cologne failed to mask other odors. Most women came from working-class backgrounds. Educational records from the period show 68% had elementary schooling only. The majority, 74%, were previously employed as domestic servants, factory workers, or shop assistants. Their average age was 24, though girls as young as 16 falsified documents to enter the system. Nearly half were war widows or had husbands in prisoner of war camps. Family circumstances, not moral failing, had driven their choices. The Catholic Church's influence complicated their situation. Despite Pope Pius VII remaining in Rome throughout the occupation, the Church offered little practical assistance to these women. Confession became impossible as priests refused absolution to those who wouldn't leave prostitution, an impossible demand during economic collapse. The women lived in a spiritual limbo, their religious medallions and bedside Madonnas testifying to faith strained but not abandoned. German occupation had taught these women to expect brutal treatment. Testimonies collected by Italian women's organizations documented systematic abuse in German-controlled brothels. Luciana M., whose account was preserved in municipal archives, reported, "The Germans treated us like equipment to be used and discarded. We were forbidden to speak, to show discomfort, or to refuse any request." As Allied forces pushed northward through Italy in early 1944, the women in Rome's Case Chiuse prepared for new management. News from Naples had already reached them. Americans were different, but how remained unclear. The madams instructed them on American preferences, teaching rudimentary English phrases focused on transaction efficiency. What no one prepared these women for was the fundamental cultural difference they were about to encounter. Raised in a society where female virtue was binary, Madonna or whore, they couldn't conceive of respectful treatment within their circumstances. The women prepared their rooms, their bodies, and steeled their emotions for another conquering army. They expected efficient exploitation at best, cruelty at worst. None anticipated that American cultural baggage would include complicated notions about women's dignity that would transcend their professional classification. As Rome awaited liberation, these women girded themselves for shame that would manifest in unexpected ways. June 1944. Rome had fallen to Allied forces, and American military governance established immediate control over public health concerns. Lieutenant Colonel William Johnson of the 5th Army Medical Corps implemented Standard Operating Procedure 176, which mandated inspections for all regulated brothels. Within 1 week, American medical personnel inspected 37 Case Chiuse in Rome, examining 241 registered prostitutes for venereal diseases. Unlike German protocols that emphasized only military protection, American procedures required decent treatment of the women themselves. The military handbook distributed to medical officers stated clearly, "These women are civilians of an allied nation and will be treated with appropriate respect." This directive reflected both pragmatic concerns about civilian relations and distinctly American cultural attitudes. While European armies traditionally viewed military prostitution as a necessary evil requiring tight control, American policy emphasized disease prevention without moral condemnation of the women. Most American soldiers visiting the Case Chiuse came from backgrounds unimaginably prosperous to Italian women. Private First Class James Miller from Kansas earned $50 monthly, approximately 5,000 lire, more than 3 times the average Italian civilian income. The contrast between American material abundance and Italian deprivation shaped these encounters from the beginning. GIs routinely carried chocolate bars, cigarettes, soap, and other items vanished from Italian markets since 1941. Inside the regulated houses, American behavior immediately diverged from expected patterns. Military police reports from summer 1944 noted with surprise that soldiers frequently brought gifts, not as payment, but as social courtesy. Captain Richard Emerson's July report observed, "Unlike previous occupying forces, American personnel appear to treat these encounters as dates rather than transactions, bringing chocolates, flowers, and conversation despite language barriers." The visiting pattern itself differed markedly. While German soldiers had utilized the houses with assembly line efficiency, average visit lasting 13 minutes according to Madame Ledgers, American visits averaged 47 minutes, with significant time spent in conversation. Lucia, a woman working in a Via del Corso establishment, told an army interpreter, "The Americans want to know our names. They ask questions about our families. This never happened before." Within this environment of unexpected consideration, the wedding ring phenomenon emerged organically. The first documented instance occurred on June 11, 1944, when Sergeant Thomas Williams from Georgia noticed a woman named Francesca had a pale band on her ring finger. When asked through halting translation, she explained she had sold her wedding ring to buy medicine for her mother. The next day, Williams returned with a simple gold band purchased from a local jeweler for 450 lire. This seemingly isolated gesture spread rapidly. By July 1944, PX facilities at American bases around Rome were selling an average of 50 rings weekly. The rings themselves were simple, typically gold-plated brass costing between 200 to 500 lire, the equivalent of a carton of American cigarettes on the black market. Military chaplain records noted this trend with confusion. Father Michael O'Brien wrote to his diocese in Boston, "Our boys are purchasing rings for these fallen women. When questioned, they explain it allows the women to maintain dignity outside the house. The women's health improved noticeably under American management. Medical records from August 1944 show infection rates dropped to 22 cases per 1,000 visits, compared to 147 under German oversight. Improved nutrition played a significant role. Many women gained 3 to 5 kilograms within months as American food supplies supplemented their diets. The women received regular access to penicillin, still unavailable to most Italian civilians. Most remarkably, the rings signified something beyond health concerns." Staff Sergeant Paul Davidson explained to his commanding officer when questioned about the practice, "Back home, we don't treat women this way, even women in this profession. The ring gives them protection when they're not working." This protection addressed a practical reality. Women identified as prostitutes faced constant harassment when conducting daily business outside the houses. American authorities never officially sanctioned the ring practice, but neither did they discourage it. By September 1944, an estimated 60% of women in Rome's regulated houses wore rings given by American clients. Military intelligence recognized an unplanned benefit. The practice improved civilian-military relations and reduced incidents of assault and robbery against soldiers. What began as individual gestures of kindness was evolving into something more significant. The first psychological transformations were beginning among women who had expected only exploitation but found themselves recipients of small dignities previously reserved for respectable women. October 1944. Florence had been liberated for 2 months, and the practice of American soldiers providing rings to Case Chiuse women had spread northward with the Allied advance. The phenomenon had evolved from scattered individual gestures to a recognized tradition among certain units. The 88th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Blue Devils, was particularly noted for it. Their regimental reports documented 324 rings purchased through official PX channels in a single month, alongside watches, scarves, and other gifts. The rings themselves varied widely. Most common were simple brass bands with gold plating, purchased for 300–500 lire at PX stores, where they were marketed as sweetheart rings for sending home. Some soldiers offered family heirlooms, wedding bands from mothers or grandmothers carried as good luck charms through the Italian campaign. The most prized were handcrafted by army engineers who repurposed brass shell casings into rings adorned with regimental insignias or Italian coins, each representing hours of careful work. Elena Ricci, working in a Florence establishment on Via dei Serali, described her initial confusion in a 1975 oral history. When the American gave me the ring, I didn't understand. I tried to return it, thinking he wanted me to hold it while we were together. He insisted I keep it, making the motion of putting it on my finger. I asked the madam if this was some American custom I should know about. She seemed as confused as I was. The psychological impact of wearing these rings extended beyond the walls of the Case Chiuse. Women reported significant changes in their daily experiences. Bianca T. from Naples told an American Women's Army Corps officer documenting civilian conditions. With the ring, I can go to the market and people speak to me normally. Before, they would serve me last or make me wait outside. The shopkeepers see the ring and pretend not to know what I do. Military authorities noticed behavioral changes among ring-wearing women. Captain Howard Rushmore, overseeing civilian affairs in Florence, reported, "Women from the registered houses who wear these rings carry themselves differently. They maintain eye contact, speak more directly, and report fewer incidents of harassment." The simple gold bands appear to restore something that their circumstances had taken from them. The rings created visible transformation. Women who previously kept their eyes downcast while conducting necessary business outside the houses began moving through the cities with greater confidence. Many adopted the fiction that their husbands were American soldiers serving elsewhere in Italy. The plausibility of these stories was supported by the over 60,000 American casualties in the Italian campaign by autumn 1944, creating thousands of absent sweethearts and husbands. Statistical records from health authorities documented unexpected outcomes. Women wearing rings were 68% more likely to attend their weekly health examinations without requiring reminders or enforcement. They maintained better personal hygiene and reported health concerns more promptly. Most significantly, they were 73% less likely to attempt working outside the regulated system where health standards were not maintained. The ring giving spread throughout the units despite never becoming official policy. Military chaplains recorded diverse motivations among soldiers. Private First Class Joseph Martinez from New Mexico explained, "My mother raised me to respect women, no matter what. These ladies didn't choose this life. The war chose it for them." Corporal William Thompson from Mississippi offered a different perspective. "Back home, even ladies of the evening are still ladies. You don't treat them like they're nothing." As the practice continued, soldiers often established ongoing arrangements with specific women. These relationships, while still transactional, took on characteristics of courtship. Madams reported American clients bringing not only rings but photographs of their hometowns, sharing meals rather than simply purchasing services, and in some cases, helping women write letters to family members displaced by the war. Lieutenant Anna Rossi, an Italian-American WAC officer assigned as liaison to civilian authorities, observed, "The wedding rings create a fiction that both parties find comforting. For the women, it restores a social identity beyond their current circumstances. For the soldiers, far from home and facing combat, it creates the illusion of normal social relations in abnormal times." By December 1944, the practice had become so common that Italian civilians had developed a new euphemism. Women wearing gold bands without obvious husbands were referred to as le fidanzate américaine, the American fiancés. The term contained neither the harsh judgment of prostitute nor the false pretense of actual marriage, but acknowledged a unique status created by these unusual wartime circumstances. The simple gold bands were rewriting societal equations, demonstrating how symbols could modify deeply entrenched social categories. For women who had been reduced to their profession, the rings offered something unexpected: the possibility of being seen as complete human beings despite their circumstances. Spring 1945. Northern Italy's liberation revealed how thoroughly the wedding ring phenomenon had transformed both the women and community perceptions. In Milan, where 17 regulated houses reopened under Allied oversight, women wearing American rings experienced treatment unimaginable months earlier. Teresa Lombardi, who had worn her brass band with the engraved US for 6 months, found shopkeepers greeting her by name. The neighborhood priest, who had previously crossed the street to avoid her, now acknowledged her with a solemn nod. These small civilities, denied to women in her profession for generations, accumulated into profound psychological change. Medical records documented physical transformation paralleling the psychological. Women wearing rings showed 43% lower rates of alcohol consumption and 57% fewer stress-related ailments than their unringed counterparts. Dr. Elizabeth Carson, serving with the 15th Evacuation Hospital, noted in her April report, "The ring-wearing women present with improved nutrition, better hygiene, and fewer psychosomatic complaints. They speak more openly about health concerns and follow treatment regimens more consistently." As Allied administration solidified across Italy, formal employment alternatives began emerging. The Civil Affairs Division established manufacturing workshops employing former Case Chiuse women to produce uniforms, bandages, and other military necessities. By May 1945, these workshops employed 1,427 women across northern Italy, paying 25 lire daily, less than prostitution but offering respectability previously thought unrecoverable. Records show ring-wearing women were 72% more likely to accept these alternative positions when available. The phenomenon created unexpected tensions within Italian society. Traditional matrons objected to prostitutes wearing symbols of matrimony, claiming it devalued legitimate marriages. Yet many of these same women accepted the fiction of American fiancés as a practical compromise. Father Giovanni Rossi of Turin's Duomo explained this contradiction in a letter to church authorities. "The community finds it easier to interact with women they can pretend are not what they are. The rings allow a necessary hypocrisy that preserves social functioning." Military chaplains increasingly involved themselves in the women's circumstances. Records from the 12th Army Group Chaplain's Office show 23 priests and ministers organizing literacy classes, vocational training, and religious services specifically for Case Chiuse women. Chaplain records reveal 147 baptisms of children born to these women during 1944-45, with American soldiers frequently serving as godparents, a role traditionally denied to unmarried men in Italian Catholic practice. The most dramatic transformations occurred through American aid organizations. The Red Cross established women's rehabilitation centers in major cities, providing education and job placement. The American Women's Voluntary Services recruited Italian-American civilians to teach English, typing, and nursing skills. Together, these programs assisted approximately 3,800 former prostitutes in transitioning to alternative employment by summer 1945. Perhaps most telling was the contrast in treatment between women serving American versus other Allied forces. British military authorities maintained stricter separation between soldiers and regulated women, prohibiting personal relationships. French colonial troops operated under different moral frameworks entirely. Women serving multiple Allied nationalities consistently reported that American clients alone offered personal recognition. Gabriella, working in a mixed establishment in Genoa, told Red Cross interviewers, "The Americans see us as women in difficult circumstances. The others see us only as bodies available for use." Local Italian governance struggled with this shifting dynamic. Mayor's records from Bologna document formal complaints about inappropriate public behavior when ring-wearing women attended church services or visited restaurants. Yet these same records show declining support for enforcement actions against them. Civil authorities increasingly distinguished between common streetwalkers and the American-affiliated women who maintained higher standards of public conduct. By summer 1945, municipal governments across northern Italy reported unusual demographic patterns. Women formerly registered with health authorities as prostitutes disappeared from official records while remaining in their communities. They had not left, but had successfully transitioned into conventional identities, supported by the simple fiction of the rings they wore. Health officials estimated that approximately 40% of registered women in major northern cities had effectively disappeared from their regulatory systems by July. The transformation extended beyond individual women to influence broader Italian-American relations. Communities witnessing American soldiers treating local women with unexpected dignity developed more positive perspectives on American occupation generally. Military government surveys documented higher cooperation rates in areas where the ring phenomenon was most prevalent. Through these simple bands of metal, thousands of women expected to live in permanent shame discovered an unanticipated path back to social acceptance. The rings themselves had no inherent power, but the respect they symbolized created real-world changes that no formal rehabilitation program could have achieved so quickly or thoroughly. December 1945. As American forces prepared for substantial withdrawal from Italy, the legacy of the wedding ring phenomenon was already taking shape. Across formerly occupied territories, 6,731 marriages between American servicemen and Italian women had been officially registered, a number that included 834 documented cases of former Case Chiuse women marrying their American clients. These marriages required special permission from military authorities, extensive background checks, and character references, hurdles that would have been insurmountable without the transformative effects of the rings that had preceded formal relationships. Maria Conti, who had received one of the first documented rings in Naples, departed for Brooklyn aboard the USS West Point in October 1945. She carried little from her former life except a single photograph of her family and the gold-plated band that had changed her trajectory. Immigration records show that approximately 7,600 Italian war brides would follow similar paths by 1947, though official documents carefully obscured the previous occupations of many. These women arrived in America with complex identities, simultaneously victims of war's economic devastation and symbols of unexpected redemption. Those who remained in Italy became inadvertent advocates for legal reform. The regulated prostitution system established under Cavour in 1860 and maintained through fascism had survived the war physically intact but philosophically undermined. Women who had experienced alternative treatment began organizing informally. They shared apartments, established small businesses, and created mutual support networks that challenged their previous isolation. By 1948, former ring wearers participated in reform advocacy, that would culminate in Senator Lena Merlin's campaign to close the Case Chiuse system permanently. Local communities that had witnessed the transformation developed more nuanced views of female honor. In Naples, where the phenomenon began, parish records from 1946 to 48 show 23 marriages between former Case Chiuse women and local men. Unions that would have been unthinkable before the American practice demonstrated that respect could be extended to women regardless of circumstances. These marriages required courage from both parties, but suggested that concepts of redemption had expanded beyond traditional religious frameworks. Academic examination of the phenomenon began as early as 1947, when sociologist Miriam Castiglione of the University of Rome documented lasting effects in her study Guerra e Trasformazione Sociale, War and Social Transformation. She concluded, the simple gold bands, representing neither actual marriage nor complete fiction, created a third category for women previously limited to Madonna or prostitute. This interim identity allowed community reintegration that formal rehabilitation programs had never achieved. The physical artifacts themselves gained significance beyond their material value. Salvatore Russo, a jeweler in the Spanish quarter of Naples, specialized in transforming the American-given brass rings into more permanent gold versions. His ledger records 143 such transactions between 1946 and 1950, often paid for through installment plans stretching months. Women who had received these symbols during extraordinary circumstances invested scarce resources to maintain them during ordinary times. The cultural impact extended to Italian cinema emerging from war's shadow. Films like Rossellini's Paisa, 1946, and De Sica's Bicycle Thieves, 1948, portrayed complex female characters navigating moral compromises with dignity. While never explicitly referencing the Case Chiuse, these neo-realist classics echoed the fundamental premise of the ring phenomenon, that circumstances of deprivation didn't define human worth. The wedding ring motif appeared in multiple films of this period, suggesting its resonance with Italian audiences still processing war's moral complexities. Perhaps most significantly, the temporary fiction of respect had produced permanent psychological transformation. Dr. Gabriella Moretti, conducting interviews with former Case Chiuse women for Milan's Public Health Department in 1952, found consistent themes. Those who experience the ring phenomenon describe it as the moment they reclaim their identities beyond their profession. The physical object mattered less than the recognition it represented, that someone saw them as worthy of social symbols previously denied. The wedding rings given by American soldiers to Italian comfort women represent war's paradoxical capacity to create unexpected human connections across profound social barriers. What began as spontaneous gestures by homesick young men evolved into a social experiment that challenged centuries of rigid categorization. Simple bands of metal allowed women to navigate from exploitation to dignity, not through dramatic rescue, but through daily interactions where small recognitions accumulated into transformation. Today, few physical artifacts of this phenomenon remain visible. The rings themselves have been lost, melted down, or rest in family heirlooms whose significance has been obscured by time. Yet the legacy persists in Italian-American communities, where certain family histories contain carefully worded explanations of how grandparents met during difficult times. The story of these rings reminds us that redemption rarely arrives in grand gestures. Instead, it emerges through small recognitions of humanity in circumstances where such recognition seems impossible. The men who gave simple wedding bands to women they barely knew demonstrated something profound: that respect offered freely, even within compromised circumstances, can create possibilities previously unimagined. The Italian comfort girls who expected only shame discovered instead that dignity, once experienced, becomes impossible to surrender completely.